Hello, welcome to Gardener's World. The roses here in the cottage garden are blooming at their best. And of course, this is their season. I have to say this year they're a little later than they were in previous years, but so much the better. And for us, it's not just a case of enjoying them in the garden, but also picking them daily to take indoors. And when you're picking roses, it's worth just choosing them so that they perform at their best indoors without ruining the effect outside. So a rose like this is Isfahan. It's a damask rose, one of the old roses. You can see that when it goes over a bit, like this one here, if you picked it and took it indoors, it'd be over in a day. So I won't cut that. And you can see down there, I touch it and the petals fall off, so that needs deadheading. But this little cluster here is absolutely perfect. They have fairly short stems individually, so I'm going to cut the whole thing and go back there. Now, what I tend to do is just take a few from each bush and move on. And that way we get a good selection to take indoors, but keep the cottage garden looking fantastic. Now, coming up on today's programme, we pay another visit to Nick as he makes real progress in his new garden.
This Pittosporum Banu Bay is quite a new plant. It has a lovely mix of kind of purples, limes and creams, and it stays fresh all the way through winter. It also links beautifully with the Evergreen heuchera down there.
We meet a couple who have spent their entire lives devoted to growing and hybridising thousands of cacti.
I can remember the cacti names easier than I can people's names. Ferrocactus stainsii variety pilosus. Oroserius trollii, the old man of the Andes.
Adam pays a visit to the Botanical Gardens in Birmingham as they prepare their plant collection for a huge restoration.
Reality is now, everything in here, moved out, put somewhere safe, rebuild the farmhouse and bring them back.
Exactly.
And I'm going to be adding more plants to my new seating area where the soil is noticeably poor. Not everything here in the cottage garden is coming up roses. I do have a problem or two, and this is the biggest one. This is one of my favourite trees in the garden. It's a crabapple. It's called Comtesse de Paris. It has fabulous blossom in spring, which then become a mass of golden crabapples which stay on the tree till Christmas. Those are all the good points. But you can see here it's split. Now, this is a historic split in the sense that the damage was done 4 or 5 years ago. I planted this, by the way, about 10 or 11 years ago. And at the wound, it's created what's called an accidental fork. The tree has developed a second trunk. And because of the weight, as it's growing, of the branches on this trunk here, it's opening the split out. The simplest thing to do would be to cut this off here, and that will solve the problem. But what I'll be left with is an ugly tree. And one of the things I like about this, it's got a lovely shape. So I could reduce the weight that is causing this to lean out. You can see here, I've already cut quite a big branch off, but I don't think it's enough. I've got a saw, and what I'm going to try and do is undercut it so that when you saw at the top and it falls, it won't tear down here. So, here we go. So having done an undercut, the top cut should be slightly higher up the bough. I must stress that this is not a good time to prune trees, especially deciduous trees. The best time is when it's dormant, between November and February. But this is an emergency, because if we get a big storm, that will rip and split, and I risk losing the whole tree. Okay, it's starting to go. There we go. All right, not too bad. Right, I'm just going to tidy that cut up. What you want is a clean surface. These torn and jagged bits are where you're going to get disease and fungus getting in. That will heal itself. Don't paint it. Painting wounds just seals in moisture, and where you have moisture, that's where you get decay and disease and fungus. So leave it open, but clean. That's better. Hopefully, that will avert the problem getting worse. Now, while I'm tidying up the branch I've cut down, let's go and join Nick in his new garden in Northamptonshire, where he's really making progress.
Despite the weather being changeable, I've been really busy working in my new garden. And it's really starting to take shape. The perennial plants I've been dragging around various rented properties over the years are looking very happy to be out of their pots and in the ground. And many have even started to bloom. I'm excited to say that it's really beginning to feel like my garden. I'm particularly pleased with my statement trees. Planted these birches back in spring and used that slightly unusual underground staking technique. Pleased to say it actually worked, and the trees are establishing nicely. But there's a few things I want to do to make the most of them. Now, they've sent up a few basal shoots on top of these main existing trunks. And actually this one I think is going to work really well. So I've staked it upright, so that will become part of the 4 main stems. The other thing I want to do is to sort of slowly lift the canopy over time so you get a fuzz of foliage up here and then nice clear white stems. And so the way to do that is remove some of these lower side shoots. The best way to get a nice clean cut is to always use the blade of your secateurs against the trunk that you're cutting away from. So I'm going to put this up to here, give it a slight angle, start to snip away. I love to reuse materials wherever I can, so I've taken the stones from my soil and used them to create the hardcore for my winding path. It starts quite wide at the entry point, and then as it makes its way down, it gets narrower and narrower, and it gives a sense that the garden is longer and deeper than it really is. It's such a simple design trick, but it always works. I'm really pleased with the structure in terms of the trees and the large shrubs I've got, and then the certain species which I've repeated all the way through to give the planting a real sense of continuity. And so I've repeated several times over, a combination of Rosa Emma Hamilton with that kind of gorgeous peachy tone, along with Salvia caradonna with its more purple-blue notes. The two look fantastic together, and they flower for a good 6 or 7 months, so that really helps. But for this initial few years, I've effectively got a load of sacrificial perennials. So something like the hydrangea down here is going to wind up being about 1 metre by 1 metre. So it'll wipe out some of the salvias around it. But they're brilliant right now, give that extra burst of colour while my shrubby structure starts to fill out. I've also got a very strong colour theme running through. So it's blue with peach, with burgundy and with lime. Because everything in this scheme is in those tones, it will all hold together absolutely beautifully, I hope. This wall is way older than the house, and it's absolutely full of cracks and crevices. So it means it's perfect for establishing little plants into. Now, if you're going to do this, ideally you'll have a southwest facing wall. That's of course where the predominant rain comes in, so it will irrigate anything. And the other thing you need to look for, ideally, is a piece of stone where it's actually tipping slightly back. In other words, as rain hits the surface, it will actually run into the wall and support the plant that you want to go for. Just going to put a bit of gritty soil in there as well to give the plant a really good chance to get its roots in and get well established. Now, I've noticed around the village several people have got this growing really successfully in walls. It's one of our native British sedums. It takes on fantastic colours in the autumn or if it's a bit stressed out, and its natural habitat is kind of growing in a stony environment like this. It's got a fairly substantial root ball, which is obviously larger than the hole just here. But there's absolutely no reason why I can't squish this down. So all I'm really losing there is water. That's nicely settled in now, and it should establish over the next few months. But there's loads of other planting opportunities in here, so I might squeeze in a few extra sedums, maybe a few house leeks as well. They're going to love this environment. I'm sneaking a few of these raised beds into the back of the garden just to grow a few kind of niche vegetables, the things that are probably a bit expensive at the supermarket. Now, when it comes to choosing your materials, there's all sorts of things you can construct these from. It might be brick or stone. I prefer timber, and these are Douglas fir. They've got a very high resin content, so they can sit on the ground perfectly happily for at least 30 years. I've got these really long deck screws, which are the perfect way of holding them together. I've gone for a very specific design to kind of maximise the growing space. So ideally, on most raised beds, you want to be able to reach all the way across the bed from the outside, which normally means there's a big path between each bed. But I wanted to make the most of the space here. So what I've done is to run this timber through the centre, which divides the two planting areas, but effectively acts as a path or an area that I can walk on to be able to maintain the two beds. So it's a really simple way of creating raised beds that anybody can do. I've got these old turbs which I've lifted from the garden where I put the beds in. And by putting these in the bottom of the raised bed, you get all sorts of benefits. So of course the green material will break down and provide nitrogen. The soil itself has got all sorts of nutrients and creatures as well, which will inhabit the soil and make it so much richer. But there's a number of other types of materials which will help do exactly the same thing. So if you've got old leaves or twig piles around the garden, they can go into the base of one of these pits and make it as organic as possible. It's a good idea to lay the pieces in turf side down in overlapping rows so that it'll produce a nice blanket of compost as it rots down. That's the last of the turfs in, so I just need to introduce my mix of topsoil, compost and well-rotted manure, and then I'll be ready to get the crops in, which will hopefully give me a lovely harvest by the end of the summer. Evergreen structure is really important to me in the garden, but unfortunately so many evergreens tend to be kind of quite dark and inky and heavy, so I always tend to go for plants that are slightly lighter in their tone through the winter months. And so this Pittosporum Banu Bay, quite a new plant, but it has a lovely mix of kind of purples, limes and creams, and it stays fresh all the way through winter. It also links beautifully with the evergreen heuchera down there. Now, the other oddity, when you're putting together a planting scheme and laying out plants, it can look quite strange when you place them on the ground. So, for example, this campanula just here is already at kind of 60 centimetres high, way higher than the tiny little ammy behind it. But in fact, that little ammy is going to be 2 metres by the end of the season. So get to know your plant sizes before you place them out, and don't be too worried of how strange it looks when you've got that initial layout. So this shrub is nicely firmed in, just needs a good watering, and I've got a load more plants to get in as well. I have to say it's really exciting being able to develop my own garden that I know that I'm going to be at in the long term. Shockingly, I've had 26 addresses since I left home at 16, so it's just wonderful to know that I've got this lovely space that I can literally and metaphorically put roots down in.
Nick's garden is looking good, and I think the advice about putting turfs upside down at the bottom of raised beds is brilliant. Certainly I would advise that to anybody. Now, my own vegetable garden is mixed, I think, is a fair thing to say. Some things are doing fine, other things have not gone so well. I've got a good example here with my garlic. I planted this garlic last September, and I've always grown garlic with complete success. Now look at it, you can see that it's not good. It may be okay underground, so I'll lift it. Normally, garlic is something I harvest round about the longest days. Using a fork, don't yank it. If I lift it like that, you can see that is not good. That is a very small clove. It might taste delicious, but these should be twice as big. Garlic doesn't like very wet weather. It doesn't like heavy soil, and it's had both. Now have a look at this great clump of heavy soil, which has dried out, so it's hard. Garlic likes drainage. So if our winters are going to get wetter, I from now on will only grow my garlic in raised beds. If you've got free draining soil, that's fine. And get them in early. Go for a September and October planting, but don't despair if this has happened to you. They'll taste fine. I'm going to leave those on the ground, let them dry out for the rest of today, then I'll take them in the greenhouse and wait till all green is gone, then I'll tidy them up and store them. It's not all doom and gloom. The beetroot are very happy, and the chard, which is the same family, are coming on fine. And potatoes have loved this weather. These are almost ready to harvest, so those are doing beautifully. And someone advised me to plant out my sweet corn from plugs. And look, it's worked beautifully. So that's a tip that I've learned. But I've come here to pick broad beans. I like broad beans when they're not too big. And if you keep picking them, of course, they'll produce more. You pick from the bottom upwards, and these pods are about right. Anybody who's grown broad beans either has or will discover that they're very prone to black fly. It looks disastrous, a great mass of tiny little aphids on the tops of the plant, and you can see them also on the outside of the young beans as they're appearing. But actually they do very little damage. And the traditional method of dealing with black fly is simply, with your fingers, break the top off like that. And the vast majority of black fly is on there. And although there are some below, they're on the pods and they won't damage the beans inside. Now, by and large, most of us can live with black fly. However, one of our viewers has discovered a way of stopping them even arriving.
Hello, my name is Bob Chambers, and this is my vegetable garden. These are my broad beans. And over the last few years, possibly due to climate change, we've been inundated with black fly. And in 2019, I discovered in an old book a Victorian method of dealing with it. It suggested that parsnips could be grown on the second year, in other words, leave them in the ground over the winter, and transplant them in with the beans. And this is the result. They grow huge and they have a larger number of flowers which seem to attract the hoverflies and other insects. You can see there's absolutely no black fly on this, and I had no black fly for the last 3 years. I'm also trying it with my runner beans. Again, no black fly.
Well, your beans certainly look very healthy, Bob. But I'm not sure you need to necessarily have parsnips to make it work. Because what's happening, of course, is that parsnips, member of the carrot family, they're umbellifers. When they flower, they attract the wasps that predate upon the black fly. And it would work with almost any umbellifer. But if you've got parsnips to hand, that's all well and good, because clearly it's doing the job for you. Now here in the Paradise Garden, I've been thinking through the changes that it's gone through. It's now in its 6th year. I started to plant it up in 2018. And back then I had this idea, I wanted matrix planting using grasses. It was a Stipa tenuissima that I had in all the 4 beds. And then the idea is that plants will grow up through the grasses. Well, that came a cropper because the steeper didn't like that first winter. It was too wet, too cold, and most of them rotted off. So I took them out and replaced them with pheasant grass, which is better adapted to this climate, but it's a very short-lived perennial. So after a year or two, those started to go. And now we've reached the point for the first year where we have no grasses in here at all. So that idea of the grass matrix has totally gone. However, it's not a bad thing because it's evolved. Some of the planting has remained strong, like the roses. For example, we have Munstead wood here, Darcy bustle there, really strong crimson flowers. The intensity of the bearded iris counters that. And I've added this Sanguisorba, which is Crimson Queen, and it's working really well for me, picking up on the red of the roses. And also on the Martican lily, which is Claude Schreider. And I think this is the way that borders and gardens evolve. You try something, it doesn't work. You try something else, oh yeah, that's going a bit better. You pair it with a third element, and suddenly it's coming alive in a way that you didn't envisage originally, but it's happening, and it's taking a life of its own. I've got a few Verbena bonariensis here. This is a tray of seedlings, self-seeded all over the place, that I've just potted up over the last few months, and now they're ready to plant out, just to fill gaps around the border. And it's got this tall stem topped by purple flowers that last for weeks and weeks and go on being produced well into autumn. And of course it has that height, like the Sanguisorba, that you can look through. And as long as it gets sort of half the day's sunshine, will grow almost anywhere. Now, my whole approach to gardening is exemplified really here in the Paradise Garden, which is very general. I like a good mixture. But I have huge respect for those people who devoted their lives to mastering just one group of plants. And this certainly applies to Brian and Linda Goody of Cactus Land in Lincolnshire. And I think it's fair to say that Brian knows more about cacti than anybody else alive.
It started in the 50s. My father took me to the Lincolnshire Agricultural Show. I saw a prickly plant and I was fascinated by it. So he bought me the cactus and that was the beginning. I've still got Fred, the original one. He's just showing his age now, unfortunately. I've been around cactus more than 60 years, near 70. I started growing them and just put a notice out on the roadside, cacti for sale.
Start somewhere. We eventually settled, got married, didn't we? At that stage you were running a general nursery, weren't you? All sorts of plants with cacti as a hobby. We had the decision to make whether to be a garden centre or to do something else. And you decided you wanted to specialise. Many years after, we've been to Chelsea 30 times, got 30 gold, so what he wanted to do, he made do.
"22,000 square feet. How many cactus? I honestly don't know.
Well, on one of the benches of small plants, we've got about 17,000, you estimate, don't you?
Yeah.
And we've got 13 benches in this area alone.
You know, as their daughter, I've grown up with it, and basically for both of them, it's been a dedication. It's long hours, but also it's been such a pleasure for them.
When we started doing flower shows, I realised I had to have something different to everybody else. We were showing big plants, but nothing in flower. So that was the beginning of the hybrid breeding.
He absolutely adores hybridising the cacti because he likes creating new plants with sometimes flowers that go on for weeks and weeks and weeks. So he uses a children's paintbrush, basically. So he's acting like the bee, and he will cross-pollinate from one plant to another plant, but it's not a short-lived job. It takes many, many years to actually make the new hybrid.
And to get the first one into flower from when you're pollinating them, etc., you can be looking 3 or 4 years, depending on the kind of plant it is.
But before you've got them on sale, it can be 10 years. This is my favourite of this year. It's a brand new variety that we've hybridised. We've probably done about 100 different Chamelevivias that are nice, but in my opinion, this one's outstanding. If you want a free-flowering cactus, generally speaking, buy a Rebutia, a Chamelevivia, or even Astrophytum. And we give cacti a high potash feed. Cacti and orchid, it's actually the same feed. I would suggest that you feed them every 2 to 3 weeks. Stop feeding mid-August.
This is one of my favourite plants. It's called a Cactus confusus. It has everything, I believe. It has wavy ribs, and then you've got the fantastic, lovely spines here, and even produces the pretty flowers for us in the springtime. It's a lovely, easy plant to look after. Like any of them, it does need to see the sun. Keep them dry in the winter time. They need to have a rest from growing so they can make the flower buds for next year. Through the summer, treat it like a normal houseplant. Give it a good watering. When it's dry, water again. So that's usually about once a week.
How big is my collection? I can't answer that. There's quite a few thousand plants. 95% have been grown from seeds in here. This is probably around 60 years old. It's Polyscia flora what's called the last plant. And the fact that I've grown it from seed for 60 years makes it very special.
The passion has been my dad's, but it's grown on my mum, and basically the two of them together have actually grown the business together, and they couldn't have done it without each other, basically.
All the names basically come from the Latin, except for the hybrids, which we can name ourselves. They do sometimes change the generic names. The Cactus family, which I like, they used to be called Echinophossila and we had one called Echinophossila zacatacensis. So if you want to try and say that one quickly, you have a problem.
I can remember the cacti names easier than I can people's names. Ferrocactus stainsii variety pilosus. Oroserius trollii, the old man of the Andes. Gymnocalicium horrididespinum variety orientale. Neopateria multicolour yellow spine.
So any you don't know?
Yes, definitely.
Which one?
Which one? I'm not telling you.
But obviously the dream kept growing, and this is what he has ended up with. That they are his extended family at the end of the day.
Getting a bit more hard work now than it used to be. There's still fun there, but we're both getting a bit older and it's taking more of an effort to get all the jobs done that needs doing.
Well, I've decided to retire. I can no longer successfully do the shows, unfortunately. I know I can't manage them now. When you realise you can't do everything you want to do with the nursery, it's time to stop.
Oh, I'm very proud of my parents. You know, it's something they've put all their effort into for so many years, and they've just achieved so much, basically. And, you know, many people now are saying, well, when they've retired, there isn't going to be anywhere that they can actually go and see such a wide range of cacti in this country.
I'm just hoping that somebody else comes along and starts breeding hybrids. It's the future of the cacti.
We'd like to think that someone else would carry on with specialising with them, but we'll wait and see. It's been a busy life, hasn't it?
It's been very variable. Some people said to me, if you worked in an office, you'd probably be dead by now.
Come on, good boy. Come here. Good boy. Can I have it? Thank you very much. I think that we sometimes take for granted the expertise and the years of knowledge that's built up from people like Brian and Linda. So I just hope that that knowledge and the plants can be passed on and carried on to future generations. Do you want that? Are you going to make a fuss? Go on then, look after it for me, all right? When you come to the end of June, early July, the garden goes into a transition phase. You lose a lot of the colour, and you do have to make some decisions. And one of the best things you can do is to cut your losses with plants like some of the geraniums. This is geranium phaeum. It's occupying a lot of space with not terribly attractive foliage and spent flowers. So the thing to do is cut it right back to the base. So you'll get new growth, and also you'll create space in which to put other plants. Look at this base I've got now, which will give me the opportunity to refresh the flowering. It won't look very good for a week or two, but you have to take a little bit of pain now to get a lot of gain in about 3-4 weeks' time that will last right through into autumn. Where's your toy? Go and get it. Go on, bring it here. Go on, go and get it. Bring it here. Ned? That's a good boy. Well done. Thank you very much indeed. Now, still to come on today's programme. Adam visits the Birmingham Botanical Gardens as they prepare their plants for a huge restoration project.
Lots of people come through this glasshouse for school trips or with their families, and they will have had multiple generations within one family that have seen this tree fern.
And we meet a man who has built his garden around an eclectic mix of found treasure.
I would describe myself as a frustrated artist. This is my creative playground. It's somewhere where I can express myself.
One of my earliest memories is of crawling under the strawberry net in my parents' garden and gorging on the strawberries. Well, I still love strawberries, and they're much easier to grow here, actually, on the rich Herefordshire soil than they were on the Hampshire chalk that I grew up on. Because strawberries really need lots of nutrition. They like plenty of water, plenty of feed, and a good rich soil is great for them. If you can grow good potatoes, you can grow good strawberries. There are 2 wide rows of strawberries that are now coming into their second full year, and this is their peak production. Nice and healthy, but it won't be ripening yet because there's lots of foliage cover. This double row here, there's not near the same foliage, so the fruit, of course, has got more sun, so this is ready for a little bit of picking. Now, if I'm honest, I can't remember what variety these are, but with strawberries, blackbirds are by far the biggest problem we have here, and the hint of ripe fruit, and they're on them. So we do put netting over them. Of course, now we can all buy strawberries every month of the year, but what you can't do is buy that unique seasonal flavour that you get from growing your own, because when you buy strawberries, they are mainly chosen for their ability to travel and store. Whereas very often strawberries from the garden only keep for about 24 hours. And a warm strawberry on a summer's evening with a glass of either something bubbly or slightly fruity is one of life's great pleasures, and which really only can happen in June or July from the garden. Now, Adam has been to one of our oldest and greatest botanical gardens in Birmingham.
Just a mile from the centre of our second city is a botanical treasure that's been serving the community for generations. For nearly 200 years, this garden has brought a beating green heart to this city. But over the last couple of decades, not all, has been good. Buildings, plants have all seen a significant decline. But that is changing because there's a huge restoration project underway. And today, I'm going to find out a little bit more. Overseeing this mammoth task is the new curator, Emily Hazel. And I'm meeting her in one of the garden's largest buildings, the Palm House. Hello, Emily.
Hiya.
So what are we doing here?
We've got a major restoration of the glass houses and the buildings. And with some of the plants, because of the condition they were in when I arrived, we've actually got to get them into good health before we can propagate and move them. Otherwise, they won't survive. If you can help me, we have a pest in the glass house called mealybug.
Right.
And one of the best ways to control this pest is actually to just remove the population out of the glass house.
Yes, you're just there?
Yeah, just there, just prune it off.
Right, here we go.
Thank you.
There you go.
Great.
Any mealybug?
You can see the mealybugs are these white insects here.
Yeah.
So they secrete a waxy coating and that makes them quite difficult to control.
People would see this on their houseplants at home.
Yeah, mealybugs are a common pest. You can get biological controls, you can use your ladybirds, and if you've just got one plant...
You just clean them all off and tidy things up and get rid of them that way. It's not just mealybug, which was everywhere, but any little surprises?
Something I'd never encountered in a glasshouse before was a stick insect. And it causes a lot of notching on the leaves.
How are you dealing with those?
We do remove those, so then they don't eat the plants. This is our really special Dicksonia exothamii. It's the only Dicksonia exothamii in the world, and it was crossed by one of our former curators, Latham, in the 1800s, using a St. Helenan tree fern and your regular Dicksonia antarctica that you'd have at home. Yeah.
So this is like a jewel.
It's a jewel in Birmingham's botanical crown, you might say. It's part of the living heritage of Birmingham. Lots of people come through this glasshouse for school trips or with their families, and they will have had multiple generations within one family that have seen this tree fern and learnt about its importance.
That's what these botanic gardens do, don't they? They tell stories. But reality is now, everything in here, moved out, put somewhere safe, rebuild the palm house and bring them back.
Exactly.
So as far as prepping them, what you've done is you've put the pots around, you've then filled the compost, and then this trunk will start to root.
Hopefully, because this pot has all these holes on the outside, that will mean that the roots will have a nice environment to grow into, which will encourage the roots to grow from the tree fern trunk, and that will mean that instead of giving it a big shock when it comes to lifting it, it already has roots and that resilience to survive the move.
This is a tree fern, so it will root out of its trunk.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, you can't do this to the average tree.
No, you would not.
You
would kill a tree.
Exactly.
Yeah. Somehow got to get this giant fern out of this glass house and take it down the bottom to the nursery.
Yeah. One of the oldest structures in the gardens is the tropical house. During the 60s and 70s, it was filled with exotic planting and was a huge draw for the crowds. But it was originally built to house the giant water lily, Victoria amazonica, and Alberto Trinco has helped with its recent return. Alberto, these are a big deal.
It's a very big deal indeed, yes.
I mean, giant water lily.
Yeah.
How did you get this one going?
Victoria's in this part of the world needs to grow from seeds every year because it died during winter. So Cambridge Botanical Gardens shared some seed with us.
Fantastic.
So we started germination of this specific one in early March.
So this really will get to, what, about a metre?
Yes. The more you feed it, the bigger it gets. It's been potted into this massive pot just 2 weeks ago.
Yep.
And we're checking signs that it's doing well.
And the underside of these leaves is...
It is mind-blowing.
Yeah.
This all covered in spikes and spines is just...
It's
remarkable.
incredible. And then if I'm feeling this pot, I don't think this is on the bottom at the moment, is
No,
it?
as it grows, we can then sink it down.
So
it gives time to the plant to settle.
So exactly what you do at home when you're putting a new water lily in. And do you hope to cover all of this?
As much as possible, yeah.
So when the top comes off this, where's this beauty going?
We're going to pollinate it during summer, hopefully, and get seeds from these plants.
You're introducing things that people can come and enjoy now.
Absolutely, yes. That's what we try to do, getting the display as good as we can get it.
Come and enjoy.
Absolutely, it's the time.
Yeah. The gardens have always been a sanctuary, an inspirational space, a place for families and an asset, making nature accessible for some of the most vulnerable in the community.
How does it feel? Does it feel rough or soft? A bit rough, a bit scratchy, like Sonia said. Yeah.
The garden also runs regular mentored sessions for groups who benefit from more hands-on horticultural therapy.
Jason. Yep. Hello, mate. I'm just walking up watching you. You seem to have this all under control.
Absolutely.
Take me back. When did you first start gardening?
It was in the first lockdown in 2020. I saw my garden and I thought, yeah, I'm gonna get out there and do some gardening, and it just went 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and I just never stopped. And it just made me feel so happy, and it just made my day being outside.
You know, you can see it. You can see the moment I'm sort of talking to you about gardens. Yeah. You're disappearing off into that wonderful world, aren't you?
And I think I'm just thinking about every sort of tree, leaf, plant.
Honestly, that's magical. Are you listening to this?
I am listening to it, yeah, for sure. We're always looking for passionate horticulturists.
Do you know, that passion, that enthusiasm, that will take you a long way. Look after yourself.
Thank you.
It's time to head back and help Emily get to grips with one of the largest trees in the Palm House.
So, I'm thinking you're prepping this to move it.
Yeah, exactly. What we're doing is we're root pruning this chamber, so then we can move it. It's quite large for the UK, so we really want to try and keep this going.
We move the tree firm, we could just fill it around. This, you've got to prune the roots under the ground.
And then backfill with some coir. It's the first stage of root pruning, and then we'll do it again in the autumn, and then another section of going around in the circle in the spring, and then ready for lifting next year in the autumn.
In the autumn. What we're trying to do is we're trying to encourage that fibrous root.
The fibrous roots will grow out from where we've cut, and then what they do is they form this beautiful net that catches all the nutrients and the water, so then the tree will survive. Using a nice aerated compost or coir will create that perfect environment for them to grow into. It's also really nice and light, so when we come to lift it, it won't be really, really heavy, because we've got to lift this entire thing out the glass
I love
houses.
the way you're worrying about moving the weight of it, rather than looking at the spikes on there.
I know, I mean, we'll just put a duvet on it or something so we protect ourselves and wear some safety specs.
I have had a fantastic day, and this is some project, but you've definitely got a job on your hands.
Yeah, there's a lot of work to do. Making sure Britain's second biggest city gets a fabulous botanical garden.
I think there's really good advice there. It doesn't matter what kind of garden you have. The first is, if you're going to move plants, spend time and trouble making sure they're really healthy before you move them. And that way they will transfer much better. And the second thing is, if you're going to move any kind of woody shrub or tree of any size, then root pruning is definitely going to help. This is the long walk, and I sowed it with grass seed, and you can see that it's germinated pretty well. If you are growing any reasonably large area from seed, this is about what you would expect after a month. A few patchy areas, but they will fill out. And if there are any bare areas, you can sow more seed. And for the rest of the summer, resist the temptation to cut it short. Leave it at least an inch long. That will help the roots develop to be nice and strong. And I can tell you, this time next year, I expect this to be a neatly mown sward. Come on. Here we go. I'm cutting back the bamboo that flowered. This is a Philostachys. Now, bamboos are monocarpic, which means that when they flower, that's it. They die. And so this can all be cut back. And there is a slight chance that there may be regrowth next year. And if you're worried about planting a bamboo, Philostachys is not that invasive. It's very easily controlled, it looks fantastic, and until it flowers, it's no trouble whatsoever. Now, while I'm clearing this, we're going to go to Sheffield, because last May, we went up there to visit a garden created, and I don't think the gardener will mind me saying this, out of other people's rejects.
I am a self-confessed skipaholic, yeah. I always have to have a look, and it's always interesting to see what people throw away. Everyone else's junk is my treasure, yeah. Obviously, some skips are full of just rubbish, but sometimes you just get those little gems. Hi, I'm Rob King. This is the garden that I share with my wife, Tess, and my children, Lenny and Lola. I would describe myself as a frustrated artist. This is my creative playground. It's somewhere where I can express myself. This is my old garage, which we knocked down about 6 years ago and created this little courtyard area. Gets some morning sun, so it's great for having a coffee in the morning. Got lots of different planters, old wash tubs. I've got this old guttering that I got from a skip and kind of planted up. And then this sign is my pride and joy. It's from my granddad's old butcher shop, and my uncle had the shop as well with my dad. And so when my uncle was selling the shop, I asked him if I could have the sign. I've got an old galvanised water tank here that's been turned into a water feature. Most of these items have come from a skip. So I've created lots of areas to sit, and this area here is the fire pit area. Really nice to sit round and just have a fire in the evening. I've got 12 chairs in the garden, and that's not including a couple of benches as well, but most of the chairs I've collected second hand, so they're all old chairs that I've kind of repurposed. This bench is something that I've got from a vintage reclamation yard. When I got it, it was black. I've now painted it a lovely orange, so in the winter time it's just going to give me that pop of colour in the garden. I wouldn't call my garden a particular jungle type garden, but it does have elements of that in terms of the bamboos, the banana plants that I have. I didn't want the garden to be distracted by kids' toys. So the trampoline used to be on legs like most trampolines, but I decided to actually dig out and have it sunken in the ground, and it's surrounded by bamboo. Until you actually get to the trampoline, you can't really see it. I do like architectural plants. Not necessarily those that are going to flower a long time, but just those that are going to fit and I know are going to give me colour all year round, really. Over the years, I've rescued plants from skips, plants that people have been throwing away. Aquiledias just self-seed all over the place, and they're something that remind me of my nana who got me into gardening. Her garden was full of aquiledias, and some of the seeds that I took from her garden are now sort of flowering in my garden. I have got a lot of trees. I have a couple of eucalyptus trees, which I know can get quite large. So this is some old trunking from an industrial sort of warehouse or old garage or something, sort of thing that people throw away, but it's great for actually using as a stake for a tree. Just putting it in at an angle, hammering it home, and then you can tie your tree to it, and it works really well and looks really good. Goes really well with the trunk, looks really rustic, natural, and it's going to last a long, long time, a lot longer than a cane would. I wanted to create an adventure for adults, but also when we had children as well, sort of making it something where the children could look at different ways to get to the bottom of the garden. I'm really proud of this. It's something that I created some years ago now. An old oil drum that I found. I decided that I would make a living sculpture. People thought I was a little bit crazy at first by putting this oil drum in the hedge. Had to be patient and let it grow round, but it does work now. And it just creates this really good backdrop for my Easter Island sculpture. So this is a book hotel made from some old drawers and just some tins, corks, bamboo sticks. It's been here quite a while. It's got bamboo growing through it as well. But I will be making some more of these because they're really good for the garden, just to encourage bugs and give them a home to live in. Sometimes, to me, I just kind of think this is just an ordinary garden, and then seeing other people's reaction actually tells me, no, it is quite a special place. We are really lucky to have this space as a family that we can use and just enjoy.
I really like gardens that have personality and quirkiness. And our obsession with plants sometimes means that we overlook the way that all kinds of materials can contribute to making a good garden. I love it. Now, this area here is a new eating area, and it gets the evening light beautifully. Now, I've made pots of herbs, and we've got mint, we've got rosemary and sage and thyme. But these two little beds need planting up. And the soil is terrible. It's very thin topsoil and then packed gravel, and underneath that are cobbles and stone. So rather than dig them out and improve the soil, I've got plants that will cope with those conditions and also relate to the herby feel. So I have 3 plants. I've got lavender, and this is a variety called Phenomenal, which I've chosen for its robustness and hardiness. I've got Artemisia. Now, this is a beautiful silvery colour. The leaves are rather feathery, and it can grow really quite big. But like the lavender, it can be clipped hard. And that's one of the things I want to do here, is clip them and get us a rolling, flowing shapes. The last of the trio is the Santolina, or cotton lavender. Again, you've got this glaucous grey Mediterranean shrub, little yellow flowers, but also can be clipped into smaller round balls. Now, can you see in there, it's a material called cut and run, which is the waste material from quarrying stone that they used on motorways. And I bought about 5 or 6 lorry loads of it 30 years ago for paths and what have you here. And it seems solid, but actually it drains very well. And a lot of plants would really struggle if they had to grow in that. But these Mediterranean shrubs thrive in those conditions. This is what they like. This Artemisia is a variety called Palace Castle, and it's lovely and relatively compact, but it is more tender than other Artemisias. But you can take cuttings, and what we've found with Mediterranean plants in general, it's the combination of wet and cold that does for them. So as long as the drainage is good, they're much hardier and much more likely to survive. So the top of the compost, as it was in the pot, is slightly above soil level, just to ensure that it's not going to sit in the wet. Okay, that's one. Let's do the next. "30 years ago, when we laid this, little did I know that 30 years on I'd be hacking away at it, trying to dig it out to plant into. But there we go. Right. So resist any temptation to add compost or goodness underneath the plant. Now this will never get very big. Santolina can make a ball something like that, I would say, but no bigger. So what I'll do is let it flower, and when it's finished flowering, cut it back. This is an intermediate lavender. There's angustifolia, which is the more common type, but intermediate tends to sprawl a bit more. Now, just because they need poor soil and they love hot sun and they need good drainage, it doesn't mean to say that you shouldn't water them. Water them in really well, and rain should give them all the water they need, but if it's very hot and dry and they're showing signs of flopping, give them a drink. Right, I'm going to water these, plant the other side, and while I'm doing that, here are your jobs for the weekend. Apples of all kinds and sizes have a tendency to produce a mass of fruit at this time of year. But to get the very best quality, it's a good idea to thin them at this stage. Reduce each spur down to 2 or at most 3 fruits, disregarding the rest. And that means that those that remain will grow to their best possible quality and size. Evergreen plants have grown lusher and stronger than most years because of the winter wet. And now is a good time to cut back topiary, although this does not apply to hedges, as the birds are still nesting. For topiary figures like topiary Nigel or abstract shapes, give them a trim so they look sharp for the rest of summer, although you will have to tidy them up again in early autumn. There you are, chap. If you've already sown biennials, like these Honesty, which I sowed a month ago, they should be ready for pricking out and potting on. Hold them by a leaf and carefully lift out as much root as possible, putting them into good compost in 3-inch pots. Water them well and then put them aside, they don't need any extra heat, to grow into strong plants that can be planted out into their final position in early autumn. Well, that's it for today, I'm afraid. And next week, we are at the RHS Hampton Court Palace Garden Festival, and that will be on Thursday night at 8 o'clock. And I'll see you back here at Longmeadow in a few weeks' time. Till then, bye-bye.